Mariah stepped off the dusty wagon with slow, careful steps, holding a small bag that carried everything she owned. The town was quiet that morning, with soft wind moving between old wooden buildings and the sound of horses stamping near the hitching posts. She looked around nervously, wondering if she had made the right choice by coming here. She had traveled far to reach this place, hoping for a new beginning, even though she had no idea what kind of life waited for her. Cole Harding stood near the edge of the road, watching her approach with a blank expression. He was tall, strong, sunburned from long days on the ranch, and carried the kind of silence that made people give him space. He wasn't excited about this marriage. He hadn't been looking for a wife. He wasn't even sure why he had agreed to it. Maybe it was pressure from his late father's words, or maybe it was the long, empty nights on the ranch that made him think having someone around might ease the loneliness. But his heart was locked, and he had every intention of keeping it that way. When Mariah reached him, she gave a small, polite smile. Cole nodded, said nothing warm, and picked up her bag. His voice was short when he told her the horse's name and pointed at the carriage he had borrowed from a neighbor. She sat quietly beside him as they rode toward his ranch. The land stretched endlessly, with tall grass swaying under the morning light. Mariah watched everything with soft eyes, trying to memorize this new world she had stepped into. Cole spoke very little. He focused on the reins, the road, and nothing else. Mariah tried asking gentle questions about the land, the ranch, and the chores she might help with, but Cole answered with only a few short words. It became clear that he wasn't trying to be rude. He simply kept his feelings guarded like a gate locked with iron. When they reached the ranch, Mariah followed him inside. The house was quiet, clean, but plain. She noticed how everything was organized with a strict hand, as if the man living there had no time for softness or decoration. Cole showed her the kitchen, the small bedroom that would now be theirs, and the barn. His instructions were simple and practical. No kindness, no welcome. That night, when she set the table with the meal she cooked, he ate silently, barely glancing at her. After dinner, he finally spoke more than a few words. He sat across from her, his elbows on the table, his eyes tired. He told her that the marriage was only a partnership. They lived under the same roof, shared the same land, but she should not expect affection from him. He made it clear with a firm tone, "You're my wife, but you mean nothing to me." The words cut through the air like a cold wind. Mariah didn't respond right away. She only lowered her eyes and nodded softly. She had heard harsh words before in life, but something about this moment felt heavier. Still, she didn't cry. She had learned long ago that tears never fixed anything. She would not break apart on the first day of her new life. Cole did not say those words to hurt her. At least that wasn't his intention. He said them to protect himself. He had once cared for someone deeply and had been left in the worst way. From then on, he built a thick wall around his heart. His voice carried no hate, only distance. But Mariah didn't know the past behind his coldness. She only knew the present, and that present was quiet and lonely. Days passed, and Mariah settled into the rhythm of the ranch. She woke early before sunrise, even earlier than Cole. She started the fire, made coffee, prepared breakfast, and fed the chickens. She swept the house and washed clothes by hand. She fixed small things that were broken, stitched worn-out shirts, and cooked meals using what little ingredients the ranch had. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for anything. She simply worked with a calm spirit. Cole noticed these things but said nothing. He watched her from the corner of his eye sometimes, the way she softly hummed while sweeping, the careful way she handled the animals, the quiet smile she had when her cooking turned out well. He felt something unusual when he saw her doing all this, but he refused to let the feeling grow. Staying distant felt safer. Neighbors in town began to notice Mariah, too. When she went with Cole to buy supplies, people greeted her warmly. They whispered among themselves about how gentle she was and how lucky Cole was, even if he didn't seem to realize it. Some wondered why he acted so cold toward her. Others said he would understand her value one day. But Mariah didn't want to be the subject of gossip. She kept to herself, always polite, always respectful. The ranch had quiet evenings. Mariah sometimes sat outside on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky with orange and pink colors. She wished Cole would join her, talk to her, or simply sit beside her. But he stayed inside, working on tools, cleaning his rifle, or taking long, silent walks around the ranch. She wondered if he ever thought about her the way she thought about him. Not romantically, but simply as another human needing warmth and connection. One afternoon, Mariah was hanging laundry when she heard sudden shouting from the barn. She rushed over, her heart pounding. She found Cole trapped under a heavy wooden beam that had fallen while he was repairing the roof. Dust filled the air, and Cole was struggling to move it off his leg. Without hesitation, Mariah pushed herself against the beam with all her strength. She wasn't strong, but fear gave her enough power to lift it slightly. It was just enough for Cole to pull his leg free. He winced in pain but managed to stand. Mariah steadied him, her hands trembling. For a moment, Cole looked at her with surprise. He had not expected her to act so quickly, so bravely, without thinking of herself. He thanked her, though his voice was quiet, almost uncomfortable. Mariah shook her head and said she was only doing what anyone would do. But inside she felt shaken, not by fear but by the way his eyes softened for just 1 second. It was the first time he had looked at her with something other than coldness. That night, Cole sat alone on the porch after she went to bed. He replayed the moment in the barn in his mind. Why had she rushed to help him like that? Why did she look so worried? He didn't understand her kindness. He didn't understand why someone would care for him when he had made it clear he didn't want to care in return. It confused him, bothered him even, but also stirred something small and hidden within him. Mariah, lying awake inside the house, thought about the same moment. She had acted without fear because she saw him in danger. She couldn't stop herself. Even if he didn't love her, even if he barely spoke to her, she respected him. She admired the hard-working man he was, and deep inside, she hoped that maybe one day he would see her not as a stranger who lived in his home, but as someone who belonged there. The next morning, Mariah cooked breakfast, like always. She placed the food on the table. Cole sat down, noticing the slight bruise on her arm from lifting the beam. He stared for a moment, then looked away, unsure of what to say. Mariah didn't bring it up. She simply served him coffee with her usual gentle smile. The ranch settled back into its routine. But something had shifted, even if neither of them admitted it. Mariah continued working with quiet dedication. Cole remained distant, but his eyes lingered on her just a little longer than before. The wall around his heart was still strong, still tall, but a small crack had formed the moment she saved him in the barn. It was only the beginning, though neither of them knew how much their lives would change in the days to come. Their story was only starting, and neither realized that the same woman Cole once told meant nothing would one day become the person he would risk everything for. In the days after the barn accident, the atmosphere on the ranch changed in small, quiet ways. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, but it was there, like a soft wind moving through a closed window. Cole woke earlier than usual, not because he needed to, but because he found himself listening to the sounds of Mariah moving around the kitchen. He noticed the way she walked lightly, careful not to disturb anyone, even though she lived in the house as much as he did. He found himself aware of the warmth coming from the fireplace she lit every morning and the gentle clinking of dishes she set on the table. Mariah, on the other hand, noticed Cole paying a little more attention. When she asked if his leg was still hurting, instead of brushing her off like before, He simply nodded and told her it was better. He didn't thank her again, but he didn't push her away either. She sensed that something had shifted inside him, even if only slightly. One morning, as Mariah swept the porch, she watched Cole saddle his horse. The sun was rising behind him, drawing a soft glow around his silhouette. He looked strong like always, but there was something thoughtful in his movements. Before he mounted the horse, he paused as if deciding whether to say something. Mariah waited quietly. At last, he spoke in a low voice, telling her he would be back by noon because he needed to check the old cattle trail. Mariah smiled a little. It was the first time Cole had told her where he was going without her asking. It felt like a small doorway opening. As Cole rode into town, he found his thoughts drifting back to Mariah. She had surprised him in many ways. Her courage during the barn accident kept replaying in his mind. Most people froze in moments like that. But she didn't. She had run to him as if she had known him forever. He couldn't understand why she cared so much, especially when he had given her so little. Her kindness confused him, almost unsettled him, but he couldn't deny that it left a mark. When Cole reached the general store, he heard people talking about rustlers again. They had been causing trouble in nearby ranches, stealing cattle, cutting fences, and scaring families late at night. A few men warned Cole to be careful since his ranch was out on the edge of the valley. He nodded, thanked them for the warning, and bought the supplies he needed. But as he loaded the bags onto his horse, he realized that for the first time, he wasn't only thinking about himself and his land. He was thinking about Mariah, too, left alone on the ranch if trouble came. The thought tightened something in his chest. Back at the ranch, Mariah kept herself busy. She fixed a broken chair leg, cleaned the windows, and prepared lunch. But her mind wasn't calm. She had heard rumors from the town women about rustlers as well, and though no one had said it directly, she sensed there was real danger nearby. She tried to push away the worry, reminding herself that Cole was strong and experienced, but the fear still sat quietly in her heart. Later that week, the first real sign of trouble came. Mariah was milking the cow early in the morning when she noticed fresh boot prints near the barn. They were not Cole's prints. The size and pattern were different. Someone had been watching the ranch during the night. Mariah froze for a moment, then forced herself to breathe. She followed the tracks only a few steps before they disappeared into the tall grass. She didn't want to panic Cole, but she knew she needed to tell him. That evening, as Cole cleaned his tools in the workshop, Mariah hesitated before approaching him. She gently told him about the tracks she had seen. Cole stiffened immediately. His first reaction was frustration at the danger, at the idea of someone sneaking close, and maybe frustration at himself for not noticing sooner. But he didn't raise his voice. Instead, he asked her calmly what exactly she had seen. When she described the footprints, he nodded and stepped outside to examine the area. Mariah followed at a distance. Cole looked around the grounds carefully. He found small signs she had missed. Broken grass blades, a small piece of rope caught on the fence. He didn't want to worry her, but the signs were clear. Someone had been scouting the ranch. He turned to Mariah, meeting her eyes for a moment. There was a seriousness in his gaze she hadn't seen before. He told her to stay close to the house for the next few days and to keep the door locked when he wasn't around. Mariah nodded without arguing. She trusted his judgment completely. For 2 days, Cole stayed near the ranch instead of riding into town. He moved with purpose, checking the fences, securing the barn door, making sure the horses were calm. Mariah watched him from the porch sometimes, noticing how focused and protective he seemed. Something inside her softened each time she saw him pause and glance toward the house to check if she was all right. One night, just after midnight, Mariah heard a strange sound outside. It was faint at first, like the creak of old wood or a foot brushing against dry grass. She sat up in bed, her heart racing. Cole had fallen asleep in the chair near the fireplace, exhausted from the long day. She didn't wake him immediately. Instead, she moved quietly to the window. As she looked out, she noticed a dark shadow near the barn. Someone was moving there. Her breath caught, and without thinking twice, she rushed back to Cole and shook him awake. He reacted instantly, grabbing his rifle and moving toward the door. But before he stepped outside, he looked at Mariah, telling her in a steady voice to stay behind him no matter what happened. But Mariah didn't listen the way a frightened person might. She followed him, staying close but determined. She wasn't brave because she didn't fear danger. She was brave because she couldn't bear the thought of leaving him alone in it. Cole whispered for her to stay near the porch, but she still inched forward, her hands trembling but her eyes focused. When the shadow moved again, Cole raised his rifle and called out for the person to identify themselves. No one answered. Instead, the shadow shifted into the darkness and disappeared behind the barn. Cole moved quickly to follow, and Mariah kept pace, unwilling to let him walk into danger alone. When they rounded the corner, the intruder was gone. But fresh footprints in the dirt confirmed it had not been her imagination. Cole examined them carefully, his jaw tightening. Whoever was watching the ranch was bold enough to come close at night. Cole's instincts told him this wasn't over. As they walked back toward the house, Cole glanced at Mariah. She was still breathing fast, but hadn't panicked. Her courage surprised him again. Most people would have hidden inside and screamed for help. But she had followed him, even though she was afraid. He didn't understand it fully, but he felt something different inside. Something protective. Something that made him want to keep her safe no matter what. The next morning, Cole told her more honestly than before that things were getting dangerous. He explained about the rustlers, how they moved in groups, how they watched land before attacking. Mariah listened carefully, nodding. She didn't ask him to promise that nothing bad would happen. She only asked what she could do to help. Cole didn't answer at first. He wasn't used to sharing responsibilities or trusting someone else with danger. But when Mariah looked at him with steady eyes, he told her she could help by keeping watch during the day and making noise if she saw anything unusual. The trust he placed in her made her chest feel warm, even though the situation was frightening. From that day on, they worked side by side more often. They repaired broken fence posts together, stacked hay, and gathered wood. Cole showed her how to use small tools, how to tie knots, how to watch for signs of movement in the distance. Mariah listened carefully, eager to learn. She wasn't trying to impress him. She simply wanted to be useful, to protect the life they were building slowly, even if that life had begun in silence. One evening, after a long day of work, they stood together near the corral watching the horses settle down. The sunset stretched across the sky, painting everything gold. For a moment, Cole found himself looking at Mariah, really looking. He noticed how the wind moved through her hair, how calm she seemed after such a tense week, how her presence made the ranch feel less empty than before. He didn't say anything out loud, but his gaze lingered longer than it had ever done before. Mariah sensed it, but didn't hold on to the moment too tightly. She knew Cole still carried his past like a heavy saddle on his shoulders. She didn't want to push him. She only wanted to be patient, hoping one day he might let her in. As night fell once again on the quiet ranch, danger still hovered in the distance. But something else had taken root between them: trust. Cole might not admit it, but he relied on her now. He respected her. And Mariah, though still quiet and gentle, felt a new strength building inside her, knowing she wasn't alone anymore. Their bond was growing, even if neither one was ready to say it. And though trouble was still coming their way, they were no longer strangers standing under the same roof. They were two people learning to face the world together. The next few weeks brought a strange mix of calm days and restless nights. Cole worked harder than usual, repairing fences, checking the cattle trail, and making sure everything around the ranch was safe. Mariah stayed near him most of the time, helping where she could and watching the land with careful eyes. Though neither of them spoke openly about the danger, both knew the rustlers had not gone away. They were waiting, watching, planning something. It was only a matter of time. Despite the quiet tension, something gentle began to grow between Cole and Mariah. It wasn't love yet, at least not in a way either of them understood, but it was something real. Cole found himself asking about her day. He noticed when she was tired and offered to finish chores for her. And sometimes, when she swept the porch or milked the cow, he caught himself watching her longer than he meant to. He didn't know why he felt drawn to her. Maybe it was her calmness, maybe her loyalty, maybe the way she stood beside him that night without fear. But it was there, steady and warm, even if he tried to ignore it. Mariah felt the difference, too. Cole still didn't talk much, but when he did, his voice no longer carried the cold tone it once had. He listened to her now. He nodded when she spoke, and though he rarely smiled, there were moments she could see softness in his eyes, like the distant glow of a lantern in a dark room. She didn't ask for more than that. She didn't expect more. She simply appreciated the quiet steps he took toward her. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. Cole saddled his horse and told Mariah he needed to ride into town to buy new tools and wire. He promised he would be back before evening. Mariah packed him a small lunch and handed it to him. Her fingers brushed his for a second. She didn't pull back immediately this time, and Cole didn't either. It was a small moment, almost nothing, but it warmed her heart. She watched him ride away across the field, feeling uneasy without knowing why. Hours passed, slower than usual. Mariah cleaned the house, fed the animals, and prepared dinner. But the ranch felt strangely empty. She kept glancing at the road, waiting to see Cole's horse appear over the hill. But the sun moved lower and the sky turned orange, and still he did not return. Mariah tried to stay calm. Maybe he had met someone he knew in town. Maybe the supplies took longer to find. Maybe he just didn't hurry. But deep inside, the worry grew stronger. By late afternoon, the wind changed. It brought with it the distant smell of dust and something else she couldn't explain. Fear. Mariah stepped outside and looked at the horizon. Nothing. No sign of Cole. She tried to shake the feeling away, but her heart would not settle. Just when she began pacing back and forth on the porch, she heard the sound of hooves in the distance. Relief washed over her, and she rushed forward. But when the horse came closer, her heart dropped. Cole's horse was running toward the ranch, without him. Mariah froze. Her breath vanished. She ran to the horse as it stopped near the fence. The saddle was loose. There was dirt on the horse's legs, as if it had been spooked and had run hard. And on the saddle blanket, Mariah saw a faint smear of dried blood. Her hands shook as she touched it. She didn't cry or panic. Instead, something steady rose inside her, the same strength she had shown in the barn, but deeper this time. She rushed inside the house, grabbed a lantern, water canteen, clean cloth, and herbs she used for small injuries. She wrapped them in a towel and tied them over her shoulder. Then she mounted the horse and headed toward the trail Cole usually took. She didn't call neighbors. She didn't wait for help. She didn't stop to think whether it was dangerous. All she knew was that Cole was out there somewhere, hurt, alone, and maybe fading fast, and she would not waste a single minute. The sky turned darker as she rode, but she kept going. She followed the prints on the dirt road, pushing the horse forward even when her legs trembled. After almost an hour of searching, she noticed broken branches near a ditch. She slowed the horse and climbed down carefully. Her lantern's glow revealed something on the ground, a hat she recognized. Cole's hat. She knelt beside it, her chest tightening. She lifted the lantern higher and saw more signs: torn grass, boot marks, and then, a few steps away, the shape of a man lying still near a cluster of rocks. Mariah ran to him, her voice choking as she called his name. Cole didn't answer. When she reached his side, she fell to her knees, her hands shaking as she touched his shoulder. He was breathing, but the breaths were shallow. His face was pale, covered in dust. There was a cut on his forehead, dried blood on his shirt, and a deep bruise along his ribs. "Cole, please wake up," she whispered, touching his cheek. His eyes fluttered weakly, as if trying to respond. He didn't speak, but his lids moved at the sound of her voice. Mariah wiped the dirt from his face, lifted his head gently, and gave him a sip of water. He swallowed slowly. She examined him the way she had once done for injured animals, carefully, steadily, without letting panic take over. She didn't know exactly what had happened, but she saw signs of a struggle. Boot prints from more than one man, deep marks in the dirt where he must have fought. She realized the rustlers must have ambushed him. They probably thought he was dead and left him there, but he wasn't, and she refused to let him slip away. After checking his injuries, Mariah knew she had to bring him back to the ranch. It wouldn't be easy. He was heavy, and the horse couldn't carry them both unless she balanced him properly. She sat beside Cole and whispered to him softly, telling him she needed him to help her in any small way he could. His eyes opened again, just for a moment. He seemed to recognize her through the fog of pain. With slow, painful effort, Mariah lifted him, inch by inch, until she could place him across the horse's back. Cole groaned softly, but didn't push her away. She climbed behind him, holding him close so he wouldn't fall, one arm around his chest and one hand gripping the reins. They started the long ride back. The journey was slow and heavy. Cole's breathing grew weaker at times, and Mariah pressed her forehead to his back, whispering to him not to give up. "I'm here. Please stay," she said again and again. She wasn't even sure if he heard her. But she kept talking, hoping her voice anchored him to the world. When they finally reached the ranch, her legs were numb, her arms shaking. She slid off the horse, pulled Cole down slowly, and half-dragged, half-guided him inside. She laid him on the bed, lit more lanterns, boiled water, and began cleaning his wounds with trembling but determined hands. Cole drifted in and out of fever. At one point he opened his eyes and saw Mariah crying quietly as she tended to him. It was the first time he had ever seen tears from her. For a brief second, he managed to whisper her name. She pressed his hand gently and told him she wasn't going anywhere. Hours passed. She stayed awake the whole night, feeding him small sips of water, cooling his fever, pressing towels to his wounds, whispering reassurance. She didn't rest once. She didn't think of herself at all. Everything she did was for him. When dawn finally touched the window, Cole's fever broke slightly. He opened his eyes, saw her slumped beside him, still holding his hand, and something inside him cracked open. It wasn't pain. It was realization. She cared for him in a way no one ever had. She had risked her life, rode into danger alone, and brought him home with her bare strength. He whispered a faint apology for everything he had ever said, especially the cruel words from the first night. Mariah shook her head, tears falling again. She told him she didn't want apologies. She only wanted him to live. Cole's heart felt heavy and full at the same time. He understood now that she meant something to him, more than he had ever admitted, more than he had ever allowed himself to feel. He slept again, but this time he felt safe. Mariah stayed beside him until her eyes finally closed in exhaustion. She didn't know what the days ahead would bring, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would protect him with her whole heart. What she didn't know was that the man who once told her she meant nothing would soon be willing to risk everything for her. The morning after Cole's fever finally broke was quiet and soft, as if the world itself was trying not to disturb him. Sunlight fell gently through the window, warming the wooden floor and touching the edge of the bed. Cole opened his eyes slowly. Still weak, but aware now. More aware than he had been in days. The first thing he saw was Mariah sitting beside him, her head resting on the side of the bed. She had fallen asleep holding his hand. Her hair was slightly messy, her face tired, but she looked peaceful in a way that made Cole's chest tighten. He didn't remember everything clearly, but he remembered pieces. Her voice whispering to him, her hands cleaning his wounds, her tears falling quietly as she worked to keep him alive. He remembered how she lifted him, how she held him on the horse, how she never left him. And something inside him cracked open fully, no longer small, no longer hidden. It was the truth he had forced himself not to feel for too long. He cared for her, more than he expected, more than he had ever allowed himself to feel toward someone since his past hurt. He wasn't sure when it began, but he knew now that he couldn't deny it any longer. Mariah woke up slowly, blinking when she saw him looking at her. She sat up straight immediately, placing her hand on his forehead to check if the fever had returned. When she saw he was cooler now, she let out a breath of relief. "You scared me," she whispered softly. "I thought I might lose you." Cole's voice was still weak, but he managed to speak. "I know. And I'm sorry for everything. For how I treated you." Mariah shook her head quickly. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to come home." "I know," Cole said, looking at her with more emotion than he ever had. "But I hurt you. I said things I shouldn't have. I was wrong." Her eyes softened, but she didn't comment on his words. Instead, she stood and went to prepare soup. Cole watched her move around the kitchen, noticing how gently she handled everything, how calm she remained even after days of stress. She didn't demand anything from him. She didn't lecture him, she simply cared for him with the same steady heart she always had. Over the next several days, Cole began to regain strength. Mariah helped him when he tried to walk. She changed his bandages, warmed food for him, and sat with him whenever he needed company. Cole found himself opening up little by little. Sometimes he told her stories from his childhood. Sometimes he told her things he had never told anyone, things that hurt too much to carry alone. And she listened without judgment, without interrupting, without trying to fix his pain. She simply sat by his side and held space for him. As Cole healed, he began to notice how safe he felt when she was near. Her kindness didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a home he never had before. One evening, when he was feeling strong enough to sit outside, Mariah brought a blanket and placed it over his shoulders. They sat together quietly, watching the sky turn pink and gold. Cole looked at her, wanting to say more than he had the courage for. But the silence between them wasn't empty. It was warm, almost comforting. Then the peace shattered. A shout echoed from the distance, sharp, alarming, and full of danger. Cole and Mariah froze. Another shout followed, this one closer. And then came the distant thundering of horses. Cole's heart dropped. He recognized that sound instantly. Rustlers. They had returned. Mariah's eyes widened with fear, but Cole reacted quickly. He pushed himself up, ignoring the pain that shot through his body. Mariah tried to stop him, but Cole shook his head. "I have to protect this place," he said quietly. "I have to protect you." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You're not healed yet." "And if I do nothing," Cole replied, "they'll hurt us both." He moved inside the house and grabbed his rifle. His hands weren't steady, but his determination was stronger than his weakness. Mariah followed him, her heart beating painfully. She wanted to keep him safe. She wanted to tell him not to fight, but she also knew he wouldn't back down. The sound of horses came closer. The ground trembled lightly. Mariah grabbed Cole's arm. "Don't go alone." Cole looked at her, seeing the fear in her eyes. He placed his hand over hers. "Stay behind me. Whatever happens, don't step in front." But Mariah couldn't promise that. She knew herself. If Cole was in danger, she would not stand back. They stepped out onto the porch. 3 strangers on horseback were approaching, dressed in worn clothes, faces rough, eyes sharp like wolves. One pointed toward Cole, laughing as if he couldn't believe the man they ambushed was still alive. Another held a rope in his hand, swinging it like a threat. The third man raised a rifle in the air, warning them that this wasn't a friendly visit. Cole felt his body tense. His injuries burned, but he stood tall. "Leave," he shouted, but his voice cracked slightly from weakness. "You're not getting anything here." The men laughed again. One of them stepped forward. "We didn't finish the job last time. Thought we'd come back for it." Mariah's breath caught. She moved slightly closer to Cole, trying to hide the shaking in her hands. Cole stepped in front of her instinctively, blocking the men's view. The rustlers dismounted. They walked closer, spreading out to corner the ranch from 3 sides. Mariah grabbed Cole's arm, but he didn't turn. He kept his eyes on the men. Then everything happened at once. One of the men aimed his rifle toward the house. Mariah let out a small gasp and stepped toward Cole. But Cole reacted before she could. He pushed her behind him and fired a warning shot into the air. The rustlers ducked for a second, but only a second. They returned fire. Mariah screamed softly as Cole grabbed her hand and pulled her behind the wooden post of the porch. Bullets hit the outer walls, shaking dust and splinters. Cole tried to breathe through the pain in his ribs. His vision blurred slightly, but he held onto the rifle tightly. Another shot came from the side. Cole realized they were being surrounded. Without thinking, he moved to shield Mariah with his body. "Stay down," he whispered harshly. Mariah pressed herself against him, shaking. She wanted to say something, but fear tightened her throat. Cole peeked around the post and fired again, this time hitting one of the rustlers in the leg. The man fell with a shout of pain. The other 2 grew angrier. One charged forward. Mariah saw it before Cole did. Without thinking, she grabbed Cole's arm and pulled him back just in time. The man's knife slashed through the air where Cole's chest had been a second earlier. Cole lifted the rifle and swung the butt of it, striking the attacker across the face. The man fell backward. But the third man, the one holding a rope, was faster. He lifted his rifle and pointed straight at Mariah. Cole didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He stepped in front of her. There was a loud blast. Mariah screamed his name as Cole staggered backward, falling to his knees. The attacker ran off as neighbors, alerted by the noise, rushed toward the ranch with their own rifles raised. Mariah caught Cole before he hit the ground fully. Her arms wrapped around him, tears streaming down her face. "Cole, please stay with me." He opened his eyes, breathing hard, but he smiled faintly, even through the pain. "I told you. You meant nothing," he whispered weakly. "But I was wrong. You mean everything." Mariah sobbed, holding him close as neighbors chased the rustlers away. Cole's injury wasn't deadly this time. The bullet had grazed him, cutting deep but not hitting anything fatal. He remained weak for days, but Mariah never left his side. She tended to him with more love than she had ever shown openly before. When he finally stood again, he reached for her hand and didn't let go. "Mariah," he said softly, "I don't want to waste another day pretending I don't see you. You saved my life twice. You gave your heart when I gave you nothing." Mariah looked up at him, her eyes shimmering. "You never meant nothing," she whispered. "Not to me." Cole pulled her close gently, careful of his healing injuries. He rested his forehead against hers, his voice low and sincere. "I would die for you, and I didn't even understand why until now." Mariah closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his words fill the space that had once felt cold and empty. Their life didn't turn perfect overnight, but the distance between them disappeared. Cole spoke more, trusted more, and cared more openly. Mariah smiled more, laughed more, and finally felt like she belonged, not just in the house, but in Cole's heart. The man who once said she meant nothing ended up loving her enough to risk his life without hesitation. And she, the quiet woman who never asked for anything, became the person he cherished above all else. Their story became the kind neighbors whispered about, not for the danger they survived, but for the way two hearts found each other in the middle of a lonely world and turned a cold marriage into a bond stronger than anything they ever imagined.